Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the dust and dread of ancient Egypt, where survival wasn't guaranteed by pyramids or papyrus, but by grit, grain reserves, and the mercy of gods and pharaohs. Forget the golden tombs and grand processions you see in textbooks. The real story is about withstanding plague-ridden streets, parched fields, and the whims of rulers who could demand your last loaf of bread. So tonight we ask, what did it really take to live through pestilence, famine, and absolute power when every sunrise felt like a gamble on the Nile's tides and the king's favor? Every era had its own trials. So let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is where you are. It's always amazing to see who's joining us on this journey through disease, drought, and divine decree. Now dim the lights, pull your blanket close, and let's step into the sandals of Egypt's toughest survivors. You wake before dawn to a world trembling with sickness. The Nile's faithful flood has failed to reach the southern canals, and with each passing day the water grows fouler. Rumors of fevers and chills spread through the villages like flames across dry reeds. Today you will join the crew digging a new well to find fresh water deep beneath the cracked soil. It is a task that may save hundreds of lives. You shoulder a length of sturdy wood and follow the chief digger to the chosen spot beside the crumbling mud brick wall. A circle of yellowed reeds marks the boundary where the well must rise. The master of the project speaks words of encouragement and reminds every man to chant the prayer to Khnum, the potter god who shapes bodies on his wheel of clay. You bow your head and whisper the words between your teeth as you nest the wooden handle in a carved stone socket. At a word from the overseer, the crew begins to turn the windlass. A heavy bucket swings down the shaft and hits the earth with a dull thud. You lower your pick into the rim and brace your shoulder. With a practiced thrust, you drive the chisel into the compacted clay and lift the handle. The earth splits with a crack that echoes through the hollow well. You clear the loosened soil with your hand and drop it into the bucket. Another man gives the rope a quick pull, and the bucket rises toward the sun. The first buckets carry only clay and dust. You wipe sweat from your brow and lean into the pick again. You work in a steady rhythm, guided by the chant of the priest who pounds his drum on the well's rim. His voice rises and falls with prayers for cool water and relief from fever. You let the sound carry you beneath the morning sky as you dig deeper. By mid-morning, you have broken through a layer of hard stone. Sparks fly as the pick strikes flint nodules set in the clay. A narrow seam of water glints in the bucket as it emerges from the shaft. You gasp at the sight. The drillers taste the water and confirm it is clear and cool. You all bow your heads to thank Khnum. The chant swells until you can feel it in your chest. The overseer orders a break so that the water can be tested before it is shared with the camp. You follow a priest who carries a shallow bowl carved from cedar. He pours a splash of water into the bowl, adds a pinch of crushed lotus petals and a leaf of mint. He whispers a charm and tilts the bowl to his lips. He sips slowly and nods. He hands the bowl to you. You taste the mint and the softness of the water and feel hope rise with the flavor. That afternoon the crew digs until the well stands 10 cubits deep. A simple stone casing lines the shaft, and a wooden windlass is set atop sturdy beams. A thick rope is wound around the drum, and a leather bucket hangs ready. You turn the crank and draw up more water. It pours into clay jars beneath the shelter and ripples like liquid silver. Beyond the well, a labor tent stands cordoned off by lengths of reed fencing. Here the sick have been collected. The priests and healers have declared this the House of Fevers. Patients lie on low pallets beneath coarse blankets. Their skin is hot to the touch, and their breath comes in ragged gasps. A healer moves among them, dabbing linen soaked in cooling water onto their foreheads and whispering prayers to Isis, the healer goddess. You carry a fresh jar of water into the enclosure and set it beside each man. They drink in gulps and sigh in relief. Some clutch the jar like a lifeline. Others sit up with renewed strength and plead for more water to pour onto their heads. You fetch a bowl of crushed lettuce, and after mixing it with barley broth, you offer it to the weakest. They sip the gruel and you watch the life return to their faces. As dusk approaches, the priests gather for the evening ritual. They stand in a circle around the sick and raise trays of incense and lotus flowers. The smoke curls through the rafters of the tent and carries the sweet scent of healing. A drummer sets the pace for a low chant. The priests rock back and forth, swaying with the rhythm. You kneel at the edge of the tent and join your voice to the chant, asking for mercy and swift recovery. After the ritual, you help change the dressings on a patient whose leg has swollen with infection. You remove the soiled cloth and apply a poultice of honey and crushed acacia bark. The stinging paste draws out the fever as the patient winces. A healer presses a clay amulet engraved with the eye of Horus onto the skin above the wound. She ties it with a strip of linen and murmurs a blessing. By nightfall, the sick rest more peacefully. A final blessing is offered, and the tent is drawn closed against the sands. Outside, you carry a jug of water back toward the well and pause to gaze at its steady flow. You taste weakness in your own throat, and quarter of bread in your satchel feels heavier than usual. You rest beneath a canvas awning and break your slender loaf. You dip it into a bowl of lentil stew spiced with cumin. You taste hope and salt on your tongue. You feel the ache of the pick in your shoulders and the promise of water in your belly. As you lie on your mat that night, you hear the distant song of the priests and the drip of water from the well. You taste the sweet relief of the new well's water on your lips. You know that you would not last a single day in ancient Egypt if you could not dig through stone to find fresh water, if you could not isolate the sick in makeshift tents, and if you could not trust in herbs and chants to calm fevered bodies. Yet each dawn you rise again, guided by faith and driven by the fragile hope that water and prayer may save this land from plague. By mid-morning, the new well has begun to draw clear water, but the plague still runs through villages downstream. Today, the priests and healers turn to another strategy. They establish isolation camps beside the canal banks, away from where the healthy sleep and eat. Families whose members have shown fever or rash must gather their few belongings and move into tents made of reed mats. Guards stand at the entrances, ensuring no one enters without permission. In this way, the sick can breathe fresh air beside the river while their disease remains contained. You help set up the first of these camps. Teams carry bundles of reeds to lash together into simple shelters. Each hut is small enough to hold a single family. You tie the reeds with lengths of twisted palm fiber at every joint so that walls stand firm against the breeze. You leave ample space between shelters for priests to walk among the patients. In the cool shade, you place shallow basins of water infused with crushed mint and pomegranate rind. When the villagers arrive, you guide them to their new quarters, and you show them how to pour the scented water over cloth that they may dab on their foreheads. Meanwhile, the healers prepare their medicines. Jars of honey sit beside bowls of powdered gum resin gathered from acacia trees. Mints and willow bark dry on reed mats in the sun. A healer named Merit crushes willow bark between stone rollers until the wood yields a bitter dust. She mixes it with barley gruel and offers it to a feverish man whose breathing rattles in his chest. He swallows the bitter paste and immediately presses his hand to his stomach in surprise. It tastes of earth and healing. In another tent, a group of women prepare onion poultices. They slice onions thin and layer them with fresh figs and natron salt in a clay pot. Then they heat the mixture over coals until it steams. The pungent fumes hang heavy in the air. When a patient complains of joint pain, they spread the warm mash on his limbs and wrap them in linen. The heat draws fresh blood to aching joints and eases the pain that comes with fever. Each morning and evening, the priests enter the camp to lead chants. They carry incense burners made of copper and clay. The incense is a mix of frankincense and myrrh that smokes with golden tendrils. As they pace between the huts, they shake brass sistrums so that metal rings out and wards off unseen spirits of disease. The sound carries across the tents and into the ears of the sick, who close their eyes and follow the rhythm with shallow breaths. At sunrise, the high priest stands at the camp altar, a simple stone slab carved with symbols of Sekhmet, the lioness goddess of both plague and protection. He pours a libation of beer and raises his hands to the sky as he chants a long plea for mercy. Then he lays small statues of Sekhmet at each hut entrance so that the goddess may protect those within. Scribes walk through with reed styluses on clay tablets. They mark each case, noting the name of the patient, the date of arrival, and the flare of symptoms. They record when water was changed and which herbal treatment was applied. These tablets are passed to the temple archive so that future generations may know how the plague was fought and how the cures were mixed. In the afternoons, you help distribute fresh food. A handful of grain porridge is ladled into bowls and passed through slatted windows to those who cannot rise. Dried fish and small loaves of unleavened bread are handed through the gaps in the reed walls. You call to the patients by name as you place a bowl on a low bench. They nod with gratitude and eat in silence, mindful that every crumb is precious. Some patients grow better within days. They laugh softly when the breeze carries the chant of priests past their hut. They step outside to taste fresh air untainted by fever. The healers remove their dressings and inspect the skin for swelling. When the flesh shows signs of healing, they hand back each amulet of protective clay and allow the new former patients to return to their homes. Yet others fail to recover. Their breathing falters, and the healer's chant falters with them. When death comes, the priests hurry to perform the opening of the mouth ritual right beside the tents. They wrap the body in linen and place it upon a bier carved from palm logs. The mourners chant laments for the fallen as the body is removed in silence through a side gate to the mass grave by the palm grove. By night, the camp is quiet once more. Torches flicker under the reed cladding, casting warm pools of light. Behind each mat wall, you hear the rise and fall of fevered breaths. You taste dust and frankincense on your lips as you fill water basins for the morning. You feel the weight of every healing herb in your hands and know that your work requires both faith and sweat. When you finally rest beneath your own canvas tent, you smell the scent of mint still clinging to your hair. You feel the ache of guiding heavy reeds and hauling clay jars of water. You close your eyes to the distant chant of priests and the drip of poultice drips on the stone floor. You know that without the strength to dig wells, to build quarantine shelters, and to mix healing herbs, the plague would have claimed every man and woman along the Nile. You drift into sleep with the promise that tomorrow you will rise again to tend water, tend chants, and tend the sick. You would not last a single day in ancient Egypt if you could not face fever and isolation, if you could not bear the smell of incense and the taste of bitter medicine, and if you could not believe that water and prayer might save you all. You wake before the sackcloth flag rises above the canal banks. The sky is still pale, and the air is heavy with dust. The Nile has fallen again below its usual mark. Mud cracks like old skin across the fields that once drank deeply of the flood. Today you join the canal crews sent to repair leaks and ration the remaining grain in the storehouses. It is a task that will decide who eats and who goes hungry this season of drought. You gather at the canal head with a dozen men and women armed with simple tools, wooden shovels, woven baskets, lengths of rope and clay jars for water. The overseer points to a spot where the canal wall has collapsed. You kneel in the sandy soil and scrape away loose earth until you expose the broken mud brick lining. The channel is half empty. A trickle of water fights its way through the gap. If you cannot seal the breach today, the fields beyond will parch to dust. You take a warm clay jar filled from the last deep pool. You sprinkle handfuls of fine clay into the breach and knead it into a paste with water. Others press the paste into the crack and press fresh bricks into place. Each fistful of mud carries the hope that the water will return to thirsty fields. As you work, you feel grit under your fingernails and taste the bitterness of dried grain on your lips. By mid-morning, the wall stands firm again. The water inches back until the canal holds a full span. Men with long sticks test the depth and call out measurements. The water settles into neat tiers behind you. You let out a breath you did not know you were holding. The fields will drink again tomorrow. The children at the village edge will suck cool water from jars and smile as the sun climbs. You join the rationing council at the grain storehouse. Rows of sealed jars stand on packed earth. Each jar bears the seal of the local governor. Scribes sit on wooden benches and unroll papyrus scrolls that record each family's share. You step forward and recite your household number. A clerk marks your name and lifts the clay lid from a jar. You dip a wooden scoop into the grain until the exact measure falls into your basket. 2 measures for each adult, 1 for children under 10. Nothing more until the next cycle. As you carry the grain back, you pass the famine tents where elders gather with their neighbors. They break their daily measure into tiny pieces to stretch each bite through the long hours. You remember last season's feast, the glint of honey, and the steam rising from lentil stew. Now each meal tastes of dust and salt, yet hunger teaches its own humility. You nod to an old man who offers you a scrap of flatbread dipped in watered stew. His eyes shine with shared resolve. That afternoon, the priests arrive at the canal banks. They bear offerings to Harpy, the river lord, and Osiris, the giver of grain. You kneel before a simple shrine built of woven reeds. A high priest lifts a bowl of beer brewed from sprouting barley. He pours it onto the earth and sprinkles handfuls of emmer over the water. He chants words older than the pyramids, calling on the gods to send the flood's breath once more. The wind carries his voice across the parched earth. Behind him, women carry small clay lamps filled with oil. They light wicks and hold them aloft in a circle. The glow flickers like distant stars. As night falls, the priests beat simple drums and shake brass rattles. You join the movement, bowing your head and feet, stepping to the steady rhythm. You taste the incense's sweet smoke on your lips and feel your heart lift. Each chant calls for life, water, and salvation. In the days that follow, the canal work continues. Crews patrol every channel, widening silting banks and rebuilding lost walls. They dig relief channels to capture water at the canal's head and funnel it into side ditches that feed the smallest fields. You rise before dawn and haul baskets of clay to every weak point. You bind reeds around fresh joints to stop leaks. A single crack can drain an entire irrigation network. Meanwhile, the granaries return to ration. Families learn to mix maize with ground bean husks to stretch each jar of grain. They bake thin cakes of barley swept onto hot stones. They boil wild greens in water to add substance to the bitter porridge. You taste each new mixture and measure every spoonful. Hunger teaches creativity and survival. The priests follow each canal crew with small sanctuaries built of mud brick. They place bowls of water drawn from the new pools and pour oil onto each fresh brick. They whisper blessings to Khnum, the potter god, and Sobek, the crocodile lord of swamps. They chant for rising waters and for the return of fish to the drying channels. Each blessing carries the promise that human labor and divine favor must work together to save the land. When, at last, the first faint glimmer of flood appears on the southern horizon, you stand on the repaired canal bank. A thin line of muddy water approaches like a living thing returning home. You taste the dryness, leaving your throat. You feel hope pulse in your chest. The fields will revive, and the granaries will fill once more. You return to the rationing tent and place your measures beside the jars. You share your story with younger neighbors and remind them that it was human hands and chance to the gods that saved the crops. You sense the fragile balance between toil and faith. You know that you would not survive a single day in ancient Egypt if you could not dig canals, seal walls, measure each grain and water jar, and pray to the Nile gods for relief. Yet now you watch the flood's first waters and carry the memory of famine in every drop. When the canal work is done and the new well runs clear, attention turns to the fields drying beneath a merciless sun. Today you will travel to the granaries in the provincial city to collect the seed for next season's planting. Without fresh seed, no one will harvest grain when the Nile returns. There is no margin for error in a land so starved of life-giving waters. You set out before sunrise along the cracked path that runs beside the canal. At a small shrine, you pause to offer a bit of bread and a cup of watered beer to Sobek, the crocodile god, whose power over water and fertility you hope will extend to seeds as well as streams. You whisper a prayer for safe passage and press a palm against the cool stone of the statue's base. Then you join other villagers bound for the city, each carrying a clay jar or a woven basket. By midday, you reach the walled granaries. Guards in linen skirts stand at the gates. You present your household ticket carved in clay and stamped with the Pharaoh's seal. A scribe with a reed stylus checks your name on a papyrus roll. He nods and points inside. You step past the heavy doors into a courtyard teeming with exhausted families. The air smells of grain, dust, and sweat. Inside the long hall, you find rows of sealed jars stacked 4 high. A clerk lifts the clay lid from one jar and pours golden kernels into your basket until it reaches the prescribed measure. You taste the raw barley between your teeth and feel hope stir in your belly. Seed for next planting season is precious. You carry it as if cradling a child. Beyond you, a coach unloads a caravan of barley from distant provinces. You see jars stamped with foreign symbols. The granary overseer has negotiated deliveries from regions blessed by Nile tributaries that did not fail. Merchants bring this grain under armed escort. You marvel at the chain of effort that bound distant fields to your own dry land, while the city rations seed the priests conduct ceremonies in the temple courtyard. You step aside to watch a group of women weave wreaths of barley stalks and poppies. The high priest invites everyone to lay a wreath at the statue of Osiris. He sprinkles water from a sacred spring and chants a hymn to the god of rebirth. You press your wreath into the offering and whisper thanks that life's cycle continues even in drought. When your basket is full, you return to the canal path. The sun beats overhead and you sip water sparingly. You carry the seed with care, aware that each kernel holds the promise of green fields and heavy harvests. At a small village en route, you stop at a poultry pen where hens cluck around a shallow trough. An old woman offers you fresh eggs in barter for a handful of grain. You exchange the seed with her and remind yourself that even in famine, small kindnesses shape survival. Back at the granaries of your own village, the elder stands beside the storehouse door and greets you. He blesses the seed in an old chant and prays for the first floodwater to wash abundance into the furrows. You feel the warmth of shared purpose as neighbors gather to receive their portions. That evening, in a low shed beneath the granary roof, you join a milling team. The old millstone stands between 2 wooden posts. You pour a measure of the seed between the stones. Then you push and pull the lever that turns the upper stone. The grain shears between the surfaces and coarse flour spills into your waiting jar. This flour will be mixed with water and salt to bake the thin loaves that feed every household until the Nile returns. While the sun sets, you carry the flour to a communal oven made of mud brick. You slide a dozen loaves onto the hot walls and wait until they puff like paper-thin discs. You turn them with a reed paddle until they brown. You press one between your fingers and taste its bitter tenderness. It fills you, as well as any rich porridge could. Under a canvas shelter beside the ovens, the scribe reads aloud the tablet that records today's distillation of seed and flour. Each measure is tallied, so that no one claims more than their share. You hear your family's name and feel relief wash through you. In a season of scarcity, precision and fairness are as essential as water itself. At twilight, the priests return to the granaries to oversee a final ritual. They hold bowls of water from the new well and pour it over the jars of seed stored in neat rows. They sprinkle barley grain between them and chant a hymn to Khnum, the potter god. Their music rises above the settling dust and carries the promise of growth and renewal. As the fires from the ovens die, your family gathers beneath a reed canopy. You break the fresh loaves into halves and pass them around. You add a few drops of olive oil and a pinch of dried figs. The simple meal tastes sweeter than any banquet. You eat in companionable silence, knowing that tomorrow these kernels will plant the fields that feed your people. Before you sleep on a bed of woven mats, you kneel at the shrine of Renenutit, goddess of the harvest. You place a small handful of seed in her clay bowl. You whisper a vow to guard the grain until the sowing begins. You pray that the flood's waters will rise in their season and scatter rich silt across the fields. You close your eyes and hear the faint chant of the priests lingering in the night air. You feel the weight of every kernel in your pocket and the fragility of hope in a land governed by water that you cannot command. You know that you would not last a single day in ancient Egypt if you could not restore canals, fetch seed from distant stores, measure every grain, and honor the gods who control the floods. Yet in every measured pour of seed and every thin loaf of bread lies the resolve that sustains a civilization through years of drought and famine. You wake before first light, to an eerie hush in the air. The wind has dropped, and the Nile is still in its bed. You step into the soft mud of your field and glance toward the horizon where a dark cloud gathers above the furrows. At first you think it is smoke or a rainstorm. Then you see the shapes of 1,000,000 winged bodies blocking the dawn. The locust swarm has returned. Panic rises in your chest as you hurry to the village muster point. Neighbors emerge from huts clutching metal bowls and wooden drums. Women pound on clay pots with sticks. Men hold burning torches and baskets of straw. A boy strikes a pair of oil lamps together like cymbals. Together you form a ring around the ripening wheat. The headman shouts orders. He urges the women to fling smouldering straw atop low stone walls so that columns of smoke will rise across the fields. You carry a bundle and light it at the cooking fire. The smoke coils upward in dense spirals that catch small locusts mid-flight. They drop in charred masses like fallen leaves. You feel grim relief at each thud on the soft earth. Beside you, a man pounds a metal pan with a wooden ladle. The clanging echoes across the plain. You join him, striking your own bowl against a gourd rattle. The noise sends the swarm into jittering loops above your head. The insects hesitate in mid-air, wings buzzing like distant wind. The smoke and clamor force them back toward the horizon. Yet every moment the cloud shifts forward again. You know that if this plague reaches the fields unopposed, it will strip every plant bare and leave nothing for the coming season. You dampen cloth with water from the canal and wrap it around your face to filter the grit and the bitter scent of burnt straw. As the sky lightens, you erect simple traps along the far edge of the field. You dig shallow trenches and line them with reeds. You sprinkle handfuls of coarse grain across the top of each trench. The locusts land to feed on the bait and then fall into the pits. You carry baskets and empty the traps into oil lamps where the insects come to rest on the warm clay. When they settle, you tilt the lamp so that the bodies fall into the flame and burn. Children run between the furrows, shaking branches tipped with leather thongs. They swing the branches against each other so that the crack echoes like thunder. Locusts disperse at the sound and fly into the nets strung between poles. You and your neighbors rake the fallen bodies from the nets and pile them in ash pits. Despite every effort, the swarm persists. The black cloud seems to pulse with life and hunger. You hear the wing beats like a low drum. You feel the hairs on your arms stand at attention. You remind yourself of the sacred hymn to Nepri, the little grain god. You step aside for a moment and pour a handful of barley into the earth. You whisper a prayer that the plague of locust may spare the seedlings you planted yesterday. The priest arrives carrying a bowl of holy water and a tray of barley breads shaped like poppy flowers. He sprinkles the water over each row of sprouting grain and breaks the bread into every furrow. The water sizzles against the hot soil. The bread melts beneath the rain of insect wings. The priest chants a protective hymn that calls upon Nepri to seal grain stalks against destruction. You return to work with renewed energy. You combine your traps into a long barricade at the field edge. You fill baskets with burnt straw and drive wooden stakes into the ground to tie smoke bundles at intervals. You adjust nets and refill trenches. You and your neighbors move as one living wall of resistance against the swarm. By midday, the cloud has thinned above your holding. The sound of wings fades to a distant drone. The smoke drifts off in wisps of grey. You tear your cloth mask away and gulp fresh air. You squat beside the wilted wheat and inspect the shoots. You see that some rows remain green and unscathed. You feel a flicker of hope. A messenger arrives with news that the canal crews have diverted water onto the lower fields. A thin trickle flows along furrows near the village. You hurry to the channel and see the muddy water fill small basins. You place your hands in the cool current and lift droplets to your face. The moisture glistens on your skin. You draw the water up into jars to wet the stalks before the next assault. In the afternoon, you and your neighbors gather for a final counterattack. The swarm has regrouped near the southern ridge. You build a torched barrier of reed bundles behind a low earthen wall. At the signal, you light the torches and set the barrier ablaze. Flames leap into the sky and the heat drives the locusts away from the fields into the desert dunes. You watch the black cloud thin and dissipate in the distant sun. A few stragglers land on your torch. You scorch them with a stick and drop them into the burning pit. You feel sweat chill on your back as the day cools. When at last the sky is clear again, you step into the furrows and drop handfuls of ash from the burnt straw. The ash will nourish the soil and discourage any late stragglers from returning. You pat the earth around the seedlings, steadying them against the last gusts of wind. Dusk falls, and you gather beneath a woven canopy for the evening ritual. Priests crush green acacia pods into oil and sprinkle the mixture over the fields. They sing a hymn to Seth the storm god, asking that his power drive any stray locust away from your grain. You clap wooden clappers and raise wisps of incense in time with the beat. As night deepens, you return home. You strip away your sweat-soaked tunic and drink barley gruel by lantern light. You taste ash and smoke on your tongue. You feel both relief and weariness in your bones. You kneel at the shrine of Nepri and place a handful of grain on the altar. You whisper thanks and implore protection for the sprouting stalks. You leave a small clay lamp to burn through the night. You lie on your mat and close your eyes. You hear the crackle of dying embers and the soft rustle of night wind through the reeds. You remember the cloud of wings and the swarm driven back by fire noise and faith. You know that without relentless effort and the blessing of the gods, the locusts would have stripped your fields bare. You would not last a single day in ancient Egypt if you could not build smoke barriers, dig traps, chant prayers to the little grain god, and keep hope alive when the sky seemed full of hunger. Yet, because you did these things, you have saved seedlings from destruction and secured the promise of a harvest to come. By the second dawn after the locusts fled, the fields lie littered with chitin shells and broken stalks. You set out with a small group of neighbors to clear the devastation. Barefoot, you tread through rows of upturned earth and charred stubble. Every step cracks the brittle husks beneath your feet. You carry a woven basket and a short wooden rake. Together, you comb through the soil, gathering the locust bodies and sweeping aside the ash that still smolders in patches. The bodies pile in shallow pits where they will corrupt into rich fertilizer over the coming weeks. Once the fields are swept clean, you turn to the broken stalks. You use a small hoe to cut thwarted shoots at ground level. You bundle them into sheaves and carry them to a central bonfire. The flames leap high as the dry barley tubes catch fire with crackling gusto. The heat drives away scavenging insects and purifies the soil surface. A A cloud of sweet smoke rises toward the sky, carrying prayers that the plague will not return. As the fire dies to embers, the village elder arrives with 2 clay jars of water drawn from the repaired canal. He invites you to sprinkle water over the scorched earth to cool it and to settle any ash that clings to the soil. You dip your hands in the cool liquid and shed droplets at each corner of the field. The elder chants a short hymn to Happy the River Lord, asking that the flood will come soon and wash the land in new life. By mid-morning, the community gathers for the replanting. The granary has provided extra seed from distant reserves. Each household has been allotted a small measure of millet and barley. You collect your portion in a clay jar and carry it to the select furrows laid out by the master farmer. He has marked lines at precise intervals so that each seed will grow without crowding. You kneel at the edge of a line and drop kernels one by one into the shallow trench. A child follows behind you, gently covering each seed with earth using her small hands. The sowing continues until every field is refilled with hope. Neighbors work side by side, passing jugs of water and scraps of bread to steady each other's energy. You taste the crumb of fresh bread and the sour tang of barley porridge. It carries more meaning now than any feast could, a tangible sign that life returns with each grain planted. As the sun climbs, the priest arrives to bless the newly sown fields. He carries a bowl of sweet-scented oil made from pounded acacia pods. He pours lines of oil along the furrows and breaks a loaf of bread into the soil at each end. He chants the hymn of rebirth, invoking the name of Osiris as the god of seed time and harvest. The villagers stand in a wide semicircle, raising their hands in unison as the chant swells. You close your eyes and feel the pulse of creation beneath your feet. By afternoon, the farmers set temporary fences of woven reeds around the fields. These low walls protect the young shoots from wind and from any locust stragglers that might return. You help weave gaps for small gates so that people may enter to water and weed. Later, you will train a pair of geese to patrol the edges. Their watchful eyes and loud honking will scare off insects before they land. While the fields rest, the grain store is restocked with fuel and water supplies. You join the scribe in the granary as he inscribes the new seed allotments on a clay tablet. He records your name and household number beside the measure of seed and the date of distribution. Each entry is rubbed smooth with a reed brush and sealed with the priest's symbol of protection. You press your thumbprint into the clay as witness that you have received your share. That evening, the community comes together for a small celebration beneath the stretching date palms. Women light oil lamps carved from gourds and hang them on low branches. Men arrange benches of carved wood around a central fire pit. A cook ladles a thin stew of leftover lentils and wild greens into clay bowls. The flavor is earthy and honest, a reminder that nourishment comes from the simplest things. The musicians appear with tambourines made of goat hide and drums of hollowed logs. They strike a gentle rhythm as the villagers stand in a circle. The priest leads a brief chant of thanksgiving to Nepri, the barley god, praising the seed that will grow in each row. You raise your hands high and chant along, feeling the heat of the fire on your face and the steady heartbeat beneath your feet. Children run between benches, chasing lantern light and squealing in delight. You laugh as one boy nearly topples into the fire pit before you catch his hand. He giggles and jerks free, racing back into the circle. You taste the sweetness of dates pressed between honey and sesame seeds. Each bite feels like a blessing. As dusk deepens, you join the elders around the fire. They tell stories of past plagues and how the ancestors overcame famine and flood. You listen to tales of wells dug by priest kings and canals carved through stone by thousands of hands. You sense the continuity of struggle and survival that binds you to generations you never knew. When the bells of the shrine toll for midnight prayers, you kneel once more in the fields under the silver glow of the moon. You sprinkle a final handful of ash and raked earth at the field edge, sealing the ritual. You whisper a promise to the land that you will tend the sprouts with every drop of your strength. You walk back to your home along the canal bank. The distant stars reflect in the water like countless lanterns guiding you. You carry with you the memory of dirt under your nails, the feel of seed in your fingertips, and the sound of community united by crisis and hope. You would not last a day as an ancient Egyptian farmer if you could not rebuild fields blackened by plague, if you could not sow each kernel with precision, if you could not weave fences and train geese to guard against future swarms. Yet each sunrise you rise again, driven by the fragile promise held in every grain. You awaken to the distant clang of metal on stone, a summons that echoes from the palace gates. The sun has not yet broken the horizon, but you know the king's guards are already at the market square. Word spread last night that Pharaoh Amenhotep has died without an heir, and the vizier has seized the throne. Your heart pounds as you dress in your rough linen tunic. Change in the palace always ripples down to the fields. You gather your tools, not knowing whether today you will tend the banks of the canal or join a crowd demanding relief from new taxes. By mid-morning, the square throngs with farmers, artisans, and fishermen. No merchants call out their wares. Instead, voices rise in anger over confiscated granaries and increased corvée labor. The previous regime's promise of grain for work has vanished under the new ruler's edict. You see old men who remember the great hymn of rejoicing turned nameless in famine. Young women clutch clay jars half empty of water. You feel the tension coil in the air. A group of elders meets beneath the temple roof to draft a petition. You join them, tracing lines on damp papyrus with ink drawn from soot and gum. You write the demand for fair share of grain and the return of the old corvée system that balanced work and sustenance. As you write, you recall last year's feast, when fields overflowed. Now drought and political upheaval have left half the village destitute. Your own children look at you with hollow eyes. Word arrives that the petition has been refused with contempt. The guards have torn the paper from the hands of the envoys and beaten them with heavy sticks. One of the elders lies broken at the temple steps. A fierce rage ignites within you. You join the villagers as they march toward the northern ramparts of the palace, carrying torches and makeshift clubs bound from wooden mallets. Shouts of death to tyrants and justice for the hungry rise to the sky. At the massive gates, you find the palace guards arrayed in bronze and linen. Their bows and spears catch the torchlight. A lieutenant steps forward, declaring that any who cross this line will taste the whip. You see your companions hesitate, then press forward anyway. Stones fly. A guard falls with a cry. The lieutenant orders a volley of arrows above heads to scatter the crowd. You duck behind a wagon, heart hammering, as arrows hiss overhead. A trumpet sounds from within the palace walls. The new pharaoh appears on a balcony, draped in gold and linen embroidered with lotus blossoms. He holds up a scepter carved with his name. He promises mercy to those who return home and pledge loyalty. He orders the guards to spare the lives of farmers, but to seize any who throw stones again. A cheer rises when he offers a ration of grain to every household. Yet, you taste bitterness because you know these promises fade as quickly as sand in the wind. Still, the crowds disperse under the guards' watchful gaze. Some return to their fields with jars of grain. Others slip away to tend injured friends. You carry your share home in a clay jar, feeling the weight of both rice and fragile hope. Your hands shake as you pass the wounded elder, who nods at you in gratitude. You murmur a prayer to Mart, goddess of balance, that the pharaoh's mercy will last beyond a single day. Days turn to weeks, and the new regime settles in. The vizier who seized power is ousted by palace intrigue. Another pharaoh takes the throne with promises of peace and plenty. Each change brings fresh decrees, sometimes release from labor, sometimes new taxes on beer and cloth. You learn to read the signs in the palace courtyard, the shell of a chariot on its side, the appearance of fresh banners, the whispered names of advisors. Each shift leaves you uncertain how to plan your small plot of land. At sunset, you stand by the village well, watching children draw water. Their laughter tugs at your heart. You remember how, weeks ago, you could not have dreamed of such relief. You taste the bitterness of political games on your tongue. You know that a single rumor in the palace can send waves of suffering through every field and canal. Yet you also carry the stubborn hope that your voice and your hands can shape the life of your family for another season. You would not last a single day as an ancient Egyptian commoner if you could not endure the rise and fall of pharaohs, if you could not rally for justice when famine stalked your fields, and if you could not swallow both fear and fleeting promises with equal measure. Yet you persist, driven by the fragile certainty that the river will flow again, the fields will green again, and that the people's will can sometimes bend the king's heart, if only for a moment. By dawn you know the new pharaoh's reach has already spread to your village. A herald stands at the gate proclaiming that all able men must present themselves at the city barracks within 3 days. They are to swear fealty and take up service in the royal militia. You listen with sinking heart as your name is called. Last night you and your neighbors sat around the hearth, whispering of the edict and wondering who among you will march away and who will stay behind to tend the fields. Now the summons has come for you. You gather your few belongings and climb onto the rickety cart bound for the provincial city. The road winds past parched fields where millet stubble cracks beneath the sun. You feel the weight of the pharaoh's demand pressing on your shoulders. The cart creaks under your weight as you join others on the dusty track. Some men carry their tools and provisions. Others carry letters of recommendation from local priests or elders pleading for mercy. No favor can spare all who are called. When you arrive at the city gates, you find a throng of conscripts in rough linen tunics. Soldiers with polished bronze spears stand guard along the walls. A clerk in fine robes reads each list aloud. You step forward and hear your name. You bow your head as a guard assigns you to the 30th cohort. You are given a rough wool cloak, a wooden shield painted with the pharaoh's crest, and a short spear. No training is offered. You are expected to learn in the field. That evening, you join the new cohort in a courtyard of mud brick buildings. The overseer barks orders for sunrise muster. You lie on a mat beneath a lean tent and think of your family back home. Your wife will try to coax a double ration from the neighbor's store so your children may eat while you march. You pray that the pharaoh's appetite for military glory will not leave your family destitute. At first light, you fall in line before the barracks. The overseer counts each man and inspects weapons. He drives his spear against shields and grips spear shafts with strong hands. When a guard counts your cohort short, he shouts and swings a whip at the nearest man. A scream echoes before the man crumples into the sand. You clench your jaw and vow to stay in your place. After inspection, you march through the city gates, past rows of stone columns and temple pylons adorned with the pharaoh's cartouche. You feel a sense of awe and dread. Soldiers raise their spears, and drums beat in time with your steps. You wonder which distant province you will be sent to quell rebellion or to guard a remote border. By midday, you pass vast storehouses of grain set aside for the royal army. Soldiers load jars of barley onto ox carts. They carve off fresh loaves of flatbread and toss them to the marching line. You catch your ration and break the bread in two. The crust is hard and the crumb coarse. You chew slowly, tasting the salt of sweat and stone. As you march through the wide avenues of the city, you see statues of past rulers. Their faces wear calm expressions that belie the turmoil they endured. You recall the stories of dynasties rising and falling in violent coups. You shiver at the thought that today's pharaoh may be overthrown tomorrow, and your loyalty repaid with death rather than reward. The procession carries you to the depot where armorers and scribes wait to register your service. A scribe marks your name with a reed stylus on a clay tablet. He notes your age, your skill level, and your village. He stamps the tablet with the royal seal and hands you a small token bearing the pharaoh's emblem. It grants you leave to pass through military checkpoints. That night, You camp beneath the stars in a field outside the city walls. Soldiers tend campfires and boil salted fish over coals. You sit beside a friend from your village who was drafted with you. You share your portion of barley porridge thickened with lentils. You taste heat in your belly and comfort in shared company. He tells you that the Pharaohs' new tax reforms have redistributed grain from certain regions to the army. He fears famine in the years ahead if the borders hold but fields lie fallow. You speak of the dry canal banks of your home province and the drought that drove men to sell their children into temple service. In the darkness, you hear the faint chant of soldiers reciting devotion to the Pharaoh as living God. Their voices rise and fall like a tide. You wonder how a peasant like you can survive the exalted whims of kings, whose power extends from the heavens to the borders of the world. By dawn, you set out on the next stage of your journey. You shoulder your shield and adjust your spear. You march away from home into uncertainty. You may be sent to crush rebels to the south or to patrol river oases. You may never see your wife and children again. Yet you bear the burden because the Pharaoh's will is law, and no man stands outside his command. At midday you ford a narrow river crossing on rafts carved from palm logs. You steady your spear as you step onto the slick surface. You think of your village's old canal and the water in your own well. You wonder if one day the Pharaoh's edicts will return you home to seed the fields once more. When you finally encamp on the far bank, the cohort sets up sentries. You fill your water flask from a small spring and sit on the riverbank. You watch fishermen in reed boats and feel the pull of home tug at your heart. You would not last a day under such royal decree if you could not carry a spear without complaint, if you could not swallow fear and hunger, and if you could not march through dust and sun for the sake of a king you do not know. Yet you persist because your life and your family's life depend on obedience. You lift your gaze to the setting sun and vow to endure whatever the Pharaoh demands. You awake before sunrise once more, your shoulders stiff from yesterday's work hauling mud bricks to the new granary site. The air is cool and still as you join a line of laborers passing baskets of clay and straw to the builders atop the rising walls. Today, you will help erect the storage that will feed the kingdom in lean seasons and secure the Pharaoh's tribute for another year. The granary's footprint is vast. You and your companions form a human chain from the clay pit to the foundation trench. You fill baskets with moistened earth and carry them forward. Each basket feels heavier than the last, filled not only with mud but with the hopes of every family who will depend on these jars of grain. The master mason smooths each brick into place and calls for more mud. You heed his voice, pressing the mixture into the mold with practiced strength. As the walls climb higher, you climb the scaffolding. A helper hands you a clay jar, clay still wet around its rim. The jars will line the floor of the granary in neat rows. You set each one upright and press the surrounding soil firm to keep it upright. The jars glint in the dawn light like rows of pale sentinels guarding the harvest. Sweat drips from your brow as you set jar after jar into place. By mid-morning, the roof beams are lowered into the scaffolding. You and a team of carpenters lift heavy palm logs and align them across the top of the walls. You secure each beam with twisted palm fiber, weaving knots that will hold even under the weight of stone slabs. The roof will slope gently toward a central drain to keep rainwater from pooling. This shelter will keep the grain dry through floods and storms. Beyond the granary, the tithe collectors ride through the fields on donkeys. They carry baskets and iron hooks to harvest the Pharaoh's share. You meet them at the edge of your plot. You lift bundles of ripening barley and hand them over. They weigh each sheaf on a balance beam and record the measure on a clay tablet. You taste bitterness as they take more than you expected, but you cannot argue with the God King's law. On the far side of the storehouse, you see the corvée roster posted on a wooden board. During lean seasons, the Pharaoh demands labor in lieu of tax. You find your name and a symbol marking today's assignment, repairing canal banks to save what remains of the fields. You swallow hard and join the laborers already walking toward the waterway. At the canal, you load baskets of gravel and stone to plug leaks. The overseer watches with disdain. If you linger, he will add more weight to your basket. You push on, despite aching muscles and blistered hands. You taste grit and salt on your tongue as you bend again and again. By evening, the granary is filled and sealed. The doors are shut and the keys passed to the temple guard. A priest arrives to perform the closing ritual. He sprinkles barley seeds around the entrance and breaks a loaf of bread into the mud. He chants words that bind the storehouse to the gods and the Pharaoh's will. You stand apart and bow your head, knowing that tomorrow the grain will be dispensed to hungry families and to the soldiers marching at the borders. Back home, you pour your ration into a clay jar and cover it with a piece of linen. Your children watch with hungry eyes as you measure each spoonful. You mix a thin porridge of millet and water. You taste hope and hunger in every spoonful, mindful that this porridge will carry your family until the next harvest and that the granary you built will protect them from famine. You kneel before a small altar carved into the mud brick wall of your hut. You offer a handful of grain to Renenutet, the harvest goddess. You whisper a plea that the flood will come, that the granaries will never empty, and that the Pharaoh's taxes will leave enough for your own table. You know that forced labor and heavy tithes are the price you pay for life in this land. You know that without this storage and distribution system, the kingdom would collapse under drought and famine. You would not survive a single season in ancient Egypt if you could not build vast storehouses of mud brick, if you could not distribute rations with exacting care, and if you could not endure the burden of forced labor during lean times. Yet because you do these tasks each day, your family survives another night, and the Pharaoh's kingdom stands secure on the banks of the Nile. Before the sun climbs high, you see villagers gathering at the edge of the granary courtyard. They hold clay tokens stamped with their household number. A line of scribes sits at low benches beneath a reed awning. Each village head steps forward, presents the tokens, and waits as the clerk checks the tally scroll. When the token is returned with a small inscription, the villager moves on to the distribution tables. There each person receives a bowl of grain and a strip of salted fish. Elderly folk and widows are served first, then families with children, and finally able-bodied workers who will owe their grain as labor later in the season. At the first table, you receive 2 measures of barley for your own household. You carry the bowl carefully, mindful of every kernel. At the next table, a woman passes you a slice of dried fish wrapped in a palm leaf. You taste the salty flesh and feel your hunger ease a little. Around you, the air smells of grain dust and cooking fires. Women stir pots of soured wheat porridge over small braziers. Children stand by with bowls for extra gruel if they are thin or unwell. The temple has decreed charity for the most vulnerable, funded by a portion of the Pharaoh's own stores. Beyond the rations you see the conscription lists posted on cedar panels. Able-bodied men between the ages of 16 and 50 must report their names or face fines in grain. You check yours and vow to answer the call when the overseer issues the order. The forced labor that follows the ration distribution takes you back to the canal banks, the tomb-building sites, and the road crews. Each day of labor earns another portion of grain, but the work is exhausting, and the sun shows no mercy. By midday, you find yourself at the canal repair camp. A squad of 50 men, including yourself, stands ready with picks and baskets. The overseer reads names from a papyrus list. You step forward and receive your share of grain in a small clay cup. You hold it at waist height as you march off to the fields. A cook's apprentice follows with bowls of lentil stew to feed the laborers when the work is done. At dusk, the labor ends, and you return to the granary for your evening share. You stand again in line beneath the reed awning. The clerk checks your token and offers you a smaller measure of barley. You dip your empty bowl into a pot of soured beer and let the foam cool the grain. You eat quickly, knowing another night of rising aches awaits you at home. Meanwhile, the temple priests have opened a communal kitchen beneath the great hall. They have prepared large pots of barley stew and slices of soft bread. Those who cannot work for health reasons may take from this offering. The charity is funded by tithes from the temple estates and donations from wealthy patrons. You see neighbors who lost children to drought lean over the cauldrons and scoop healing meal into their bowls. The priests chant a blessing and offer holy water to those in the queue. Even as you eat, scribes tally every bowl taken and record the name of each recipient. The temple ledger will be consulted when the next distribution is planned. No one must take more than their share, or the system collapses. You swallow the last of the stew and carry your bowl back to the washing trough. The apprentices scrub it clean with sand and water, ready for use tomorrow. Under a single lantern in the courtyard, you meet the village headman. He shows you the final tally of grain owed as tithes to the palace. Your contribution, he says, amounts to 26 measures of barley over the season. In return, you may draw work rations throughout the dry months. You nod and feel the weight of obligations settle on your shoulders. The grain you paid was measured in sweat, blood, and the promise of future harvests. On your way home, you pause at the shrine of Renenutit, goddess of nourishment. You leave 3 grains of barley in her bowl and place a folded token beside it. You whisper a vow that you will tend your family's fields with all your strength until the flood returns. You pray that your forced labor will not be wasted and that the granaries you helped build will hold enough grain to feed your children. At nightfall, you lie on your mat and taste the last bits of porridge on your tongue. You feel grain dust clinging to your hair and mud beneath your nails. You hear the distant cries of guards and the faint chant of temple priests as they prepare tomorrow's rations. You know that without these storehouses, without the strict distribution, and without the hard work forced upon you, the lean season would turn to famine and the kingdom to chaos. You would not last a single year in ancient Egypt if you could not build vast granaries of sun-baked brick, measure every peck of grain with exacting care, and endure forced labor in the name of survival. Yet because of this system, some seed is saved, some belly is fed, and the Pharaoh's realm endures another cycle beneath the shifting waters of the Nile. You wake before the sun reaches the temple pylons, stepping over piles of clay pots and braided reed mats as priest healers begin their own morning rituals. The air is cool and carries the scent of incense and myrrh. You follow a low corridor lined with painted reliefs of Imhotep, the great physician. At the inner sanctuary, a priest slides aside a heavy curtain of woven linen and beckons you forward. He holds a small jar of green paste, made from crushed juniper berries and garlic. Your task today is to receive a healing ritual for the stomach fever that has plagued the village. The priest washes your hands in a basin of scented water mixed with honey and ground coriander. You feel the warmth spread through your fingers as he murmurs a brief prayer to Sekhmet, the lioness goddess of healing and destruction. He then spreads the green paste on your wrists and temples. You close your eyes at the cool sting. He places a small clay tablet engraved with a protective spell into your right palm. The spell is meant to draw the fever from your body and bind it to the inscribed words. You tuck the tablet inside your linen cuff to keep it pressed above your pulse. Next, the priest leads you to a low stone altar covered in ribbons of fine linen and bowls of colored pigments. He motions for you to lie on your back and stretches your robe aside. He draws 3 circles of red ochre on your chest and 3 circles of black coal beneath each knee. Each circle marks a point for the healing currents to flow. 2 assistants chant softly as they pass bowls of powdered myrrh and frankincense through your fingertips. The incense curls into the air, and a fine dust settles on your skin. You breathe deeply and feel the ache in your bones begin to soften. After an hour of chanting, the main priest steps forward with a copper sistrum. He shakes it until the brass rings echo through the sanctuary. The metal notes vibrate through your chest and rise into your throat. He guides a small sacred snake, carved from serpentine stone, to trace each ochre circle on your torso. The snake's carved body glides across your flesh with an almost electric sensation. You feel tension slip from your shoulders and a cool wash travel to your feet. The priest's voice rings out a final incantation, calling on Thoth, the god of wisdom, to scribe your body free of illness. When the ritual ends, you sit on a reed mat by the courtyard fountain. A healer presses a fresh fig leaf poultice against your brow and offers you a cup of bitter tea brewed from willow bark and mint. You sip the tea and taste the pith of wood and the sharpness of herb. Your belly settles and the heat beneath your skin cools to a steady warmth. The sun climbs above the roof of the temple, and you rise to thank the priests. Each of them drapes a small amulet over your neck, a scarab carved from green feldspar to guard your heart, and a miniature eye of Horus in gold foil to ward off evil spirits. You leave the temple and find children waiting at the gate. They hold small bundles of dried herbs tangled with rue and juniper. They press these lucky charms into your hand and whisper a chant to ensure your safe passage home. You smile and promise to return when the moon wanes if the fever returns. As you step onto the sunlit street, you feel both lighter and more burdened at once. You carry with you the priest's words, the amulet's weight, and the memory of healing chants echoing through stone halls. By midday, you return to the village well and draw fresh water. You release each amulet into your mouth for a moment, then loop it gently beneath your tunic. You scratch a small mark on your token to record the cure and pass it to the temple scribe, who notes the success. He marks the tally on a clay tablet so that the healers know which remedies have worked and which need further trials. You catch the glint of the scarab under your heart and feel its steady watch over your pulse. That evening, you join the temple out beyond the city walls for a second ceremony. A circle of healers stands around a low fire. They roast figs in honey and pour thin beer across flat loaves. You share a cup of beer and a corner of bread with an elderly healer who taught you this ritual. He tells you how the goddess Isis once carried her son Horus back to health with a single breath. You close your eyes at his story and taste flames sweet at the edges of your tongue. Before you sleep, you slip beneath your blanket and place each amulet on a small clay shelf carved into the wall. You whisper a private prayer to Sekhmet and Imhotep, thanking them for their mercy. You feel the gentle hum of temple magic woven into your bones. You know that without these priest healers, these amulets, and these ancient chants, you would not weather a single day among plagues, colds, and flame fever. Yet because you trust in temple medicine and magic, you carry with you the fragile promise of health beneath the ever-turning stars. By the time the sun reaches its zenith, the temple courtyard has filled with those seeking cures for ailments that medicine alone cannot heal. Today's second ritual begins with a procession from the inner sanctuary to the Hall of Shadows, where the priests confront unseen spirits believed to cause convulsions and madness. A line of acolytes carries sacred statues of Bes, the protective dwarf god, and Taweret, the hippopotamus goddess, who guards mothers and children. You step forward with a small bronze bowl of oil, infused with frankincense and castor seed. The high priest dips his fingers into the oil and sprinkles droplets in a circle around the patient's feet. The patient reclines on a low stone couch carved into the floor, eyes wide and shaking as acolytes whisper protective spells. The high priest recites the Book of the Dead verses meant to cast out malevolent forces. You watch as he rubs oil onto the patient's brow and temples in clockwise circles. The warm slickness soothes the skin. A pair of assistants holds a reed fan above the couch to disperse the scent of incense and the smoke swallowed from the sacred braziers. Next, the healers bring out the sacred knife, shaped like a fish, to slice away invisible threads that bind the spirit. The blade is not meant to cut flesh, but to sever magical bonds. The priest slides it through the air at precise intervals above the patient's chest. At each motion, he speaks the name of a protective deity to reinforce the barrier against evil. The assistants ring tiny bells so that the clanging noise shatters unseen bonds. You feel the air vibrate and sense tension leave the chamber. After the exorcism chant, The patient is led to the pool of purity at the rear of the temple. A shallow basin carved from white limestone holds water from the sacred spring. The priest blesses the water with barley flour and pours a cup of sweet beer into the pool. The patient steps in, washing away sweat dust and the lingering sting of the magical ritual. You hold a reed mat for the patient to stand on and whisper a prayer of safe passage before stepping back into the courtyard. Once the patient emerges, the priest turns to the apothecary bench, where a dozen jars of herbal remedies stand on chamfered shelves. You see preparations of willow bark, clay, comfrey root, and dried pomegranate rind. The healer selects a powder of ground frankincense mixed with carob bean and crushed galena. He brushes a thin layer onto a small strip of linen and ties it around the patient's upper arm. That bandage serves as both medicine and talisman. In the afternoon, the priests conduct a group healing for minor ailments in the open air beneath the temple colonnade. Villagers with sprains, rashes, or persistent coughs bring tickets stamped with ink imported from the Delta marshes. One by one, each person steps onto a raised platform. A priest holds a reed stylus and writes an invocation onto fresh linen. An assistant then dips the cloth into a bowl of water scented with lotus petals. The wet bandage is pressed onto the problem area. A second priest traces protective sigils in kohl on the patient's forehead. When the group ritual ends, you join in a communal recitation of the hymn to Sekhmet. Voices rise together as the priests strike sistrums and foot drums keep time. You feel the unity of the congregation lend strength to the healing words. In that moment, you sense hidden barriers between body and mind fall away beneath the chant. As dusk approaches, the temple lights torches around the sacred garden. You follow the priests down a narrow path lined with medicinal plants. At each station, they pluck fresh leaves and flowers for night poultices. You hand silver bowls to women who apply them to tired joints and cracked skin. The cool mash of crushed mint and marjoram leaves is wrapped in cloth and tied at the wrist. Each patient closes her eyes and inhales the pungent scent as relief spreads from the skin into weary muscles. The final rite of the day takes place at the Chamber of Stars, a room painted with constellations associated with healing deities. The high priest invites each patient to lie on an angled stone slab and gaze upward. He measures the patient's pulse at wrist and neck and compares it to the hour on a sundial carved above the doorway. He consults the Book of Hours to determine which deity's hour will govern the night's healing. Then he chants the closing invocation to Horus, the healer god, and sprinkles a handful of the patient's favorite grain into the night air as an offering. You step outside into the cool evening breeze and feel a sense of wonder at the blend of medicine, ritual, and faith. Each cure you have witnessed today combined careful herbal knowledge with the power of symbols, sound, and shared belief. You taste the lingering sweetness of saffron honey on your lips and carry with you a small vial of pressed olive oil as a reminder of the care you have received. As you walk home by torchlight, you reflect on the day's events. You know that without the temple's skilled priest healers, without amulets and exorcism rites, and without rituals tuned to the rhythms of gods and stars, disease could ravage villages unchecked. You feel gratitude for each chant shared, each poultice applied, each amulet tied. You also carry a humble understanding of how fragile your health can be, and how much you depend on both science and magic in the world of ancient Egypt. You awake before dawn to the low murmur of hundreds of people stirring in the Pantis, refugee camp beside the canal. The call to morning prayers drifts across reed shelters pressed close together like grains of sand. You step over a child sleeping on a straw mat and join the steady line of villagers waiting for water drawn from the canal. The ration of fresh water is barely enough for washing and drinking, but never enough to cook. Beyond this camp lies your home village, now empty of people forced to flee when the canals ran dry and the granaries emptied. You carry a small jug to the trough and fill it under the watchful eye of a guard appointed by the temple. He checks your household token and nods when the clay seal matches his list. You pour the water into a low basin where young women rinse bowls and jugs for the day ahead. You taste the cool liquid on your lips and feel hope return, as though the canal itself flows through your veins. Around you, tents of woven matting cling to wooden poles. Each family stakes out the smallest patch of shade they can find. Children huddle close to their mothers when they cry out for porridge. Men gather in loose circles and talk of distant relatives who found work on the pyramid sites. You see a man with a broken leg leaning on a crudely fashioned crutch and wonder if temple healers still care for the wounded among the masses. At sunrise, the camp leaders assemble beneath a canvas awning at the center of the settlement. A horn sounds and they call for volunteers to carry water and wood to the communal ovens. You step forward and offer your hands. You will bake flat loaves for the hungry until the temple sentries can resupply the camp from distant storehouses. You join a group of young men and women who stack clay pots on low braziers fueled by date palm husks carried in woven baskets. By mid-morning, the ovens glow like glowing stone. You slide trays of dough onto the hot walls and wait until the edges crisp. The smell of warm bread drifts through the crowded lanes. You take a fresh loaf and break it into 3 pieces for your own family. You share the crust with a neighbor whose children have gone 2 days without grain. She presses her hand against your arm and thanks you in a whisper. You feel the weight of her gratitude settle in your chest. Beyond the ovens, a tent has been set aside for children. An older scribe teaches them to paint symbols on pottery shards. He hopes to train some as scribes when peace returns. You watch a little girl carefully trace the symbol for water onto a shard. You remember how you learned these shapes at school long ago before you joined your father in the fields. Now the children learn only what they must survive. As the sun climbs, you join the work party, repairing the canal banks near the camp. You and others lift mud bricks and press them into the crumbling walls. A small stream of water flows again where the canal has been patched. You feel the rush of the revived current on your hands and smile at the simple miracle of repair. Each patch you make carries life to gardens that will grow vegetables for the camp kitchens. At midday, all labor halts for the distribution of rations. You line up with the others beneath the shade of a palm grove. A clerk calls out names and tears rations of boiled grain from large cauldrons. You hold your bowl steady and step forward. The cook ladles the warm porridge into your vessel. Each spoonful soothes aching muscles and dulls hunger. You share a piece of salted fish with a young mother and her baby whose cries have gone silent with thirst and starvation. After the meal, the priests arrive with amulets for protection. They offer a small scarab of green jasper and a painted eye of Horus on a strip of linen. They tie the linen around each child's wrist and bless their spirits against plague and misfortune. You accept an amulet for your own neck and feel its weight like the promise of divine watchfulness. In the afternoon, the scribe who records each household shares news of the road eastward. He says some families organize caravans to travel further down the Nile where fields still yield barley and dates. You think of your home and wonder if you will ever return. You listen as villagers debate whether to stay and wait for the next flood or to gamble on an uncertain journey in search of work and water. By evening, you join a group gathering reeds from the canal bank to repair tents. You bind the bundles with strips of palm fiber and pass them along a line to a man on the far side of the fence. He thatches the walls of a shelter near the latrine area. Despite the smell, you work quickly to protect as many huts as possible from wind and sand. Each refuge you patch is a lifeline against the desert night. When the daylight fades, you gather for a lighting ceremony at the camp shrine. The high priest steps forward and lights oil lamps carved in the shape of small bowls. He chants a hymn to Sobek, the crocodile god of water and renewal. Each lamp represents a prayer for rain and for fertile fields. You hold your candle above your head and join the chorus of voices. The flicker of flame and the ripple of song lift your spirit above the pressing hardships of the day. Under the silver moon, you carry water jugs back to your own shelter. Your wife and children wait on straw mats beneath low beams. You pour fresh water into a bowl for washing and hand out pieces of bread. The children press against you for the salt from the fish and chew in near silence. You taste relief and exhaustion in equal measure. Before you sleep, you kneel beside a small altar of carved mud brick. You place the scarab amulet before the painted eye of Horus and whisper a vow to protect your family until the Nile returns. You feel the weight of the camp's shared fate settle on your heart. You wonder how many will survive until the next flood. You close your eyes to the distant murmur of prayer and the rustle of reed mats in the cool night breeze. You know that without the chance to flee to this canal town, you and your family would have starved long ago. You know that settling in crowded quarters demands constant labor, constant care, and constant faith. You will not last a single season as a refugee if you cannot share your water, share your grain, and share your prayers. Yet because you did these things today, you carry the fragile promise of life onward under the ever-shifting sands of Egypt. You wake before dawn to the low chant of priests, calling to Anubis, the jackal god of embalming and the ferryman of the dead. You stand in the cool shadow of the mortuary temple beside the great stone ramp that leads to the tombs. Today you will witness and assist in the sacred rites that prepare a noble's body for its journey into the afterlife. At first light you step into the embalming hall where whitewashed walls gleam in torchlight. The air carries the scent of myrrh and natron salt. A team of priests, embalmers, kneels around a slab of polished limestone. There lies the body wrapped only in linen bands around the chest to hold the skin taut. The senior priest wears a jackal mask and holds the ritual dagger. He intones an invocation to Osiris, the revived king who rules the underworld. You bow your head as he traces a line down the left side of the noble's belly, slice by careful slice, and remove the internal organs. Assistants stand ready with alabaster jars carved in the shape of the 4 sons of Horus. Each jar will hold a different organ. You hand the first jar forward as the liver is extracted. It is dark and glistening. You place the lid on the jar and cover it with a linen embalmment cloth. The heart remains in place because it is the seat of memory and will be weighed on the scales in the Hall of Truth. The brain is drawn out through the nose in slender coils and discarded with reverence to avoid bearing the sins of the living. Next, the body is washed in water mixed with palm wine and lotus petals. You pour the fragrant liquid over the arms and legs. A healer anoints the limbs with a paste of crushed cedar resin and myrrh to preserve the flesh. Then the priests sprinkle natron salt into every cavity and pack it around the body to desiccate the tissues. For 70 days, the noble's body will rest on the slab, the air heavy with incense and the soft scrape of linen bandages. After the drying period, the priests return and shave the hair from the body. They lay out rolls of fine linen on low tables. Each strip of cloth bears a protective inscription from the Book of the Dead. You help wrap the arms across the chest and bind the legs in straight lines. Between each layer, the priests place small amulets carved from faience. You carefully tuck a scarab beetle scarab over the heart to prevent it from testifying against the deceased at judgment. You set an Eye of Horus amulet over the throat to restore breath in the next world. As the final bandages are drawn across the closed eyes, you help lower the wrapped body into a wooden coffin painted with scenes of the solar bark and the weighing of the heart. The coffin walls bear hieroglyphic spells, calling on Ra, the sun god, to grant safe passage through the underworld, and on Thoth, the scribe god, to record the soul's journey. You trace your finger over the painted symbols and feel their power hum beneath the wood. When the coffin lid is secured, you assist in carrying the noble's bier through a line of mourners into the courtyard beyond. Men and women raise their arms in lamentation. A group of mourners dressed in leopard skins wails a dirge for the departed. You feel the weight of the coffin's final burden and step in time with the priests who bear lanterns to draw back the shadows of death. In the courtyard, you help position the coffin before the great stone doorway that leads into the rock-cut tomb. The high priest stands on a raised platform and performs the opening of the mouth ceremony. He touches the coffin's face with a ritual adze to restore the senses of the deceased. He touches lips, ears, and eyes in sequence, uttering words that will allow the noble to see, hear, and speak in the afterlife. The sound of his voice echoes through the silent crowd. After the ceremony, the coffin is carried into the tomb's antechamber. You follow beneath the flicker of torchlight and pass alongside Ushabtai figures arrayed on low shelves. These little servant statues will rise to labor for the noble in the field of reeds when he calls. You help set a final tray of food offerings at the foot of the coffin, loaves of barley bread, jars of honey, and a dish of figs and dates. The fragrance of the offerings mingles with the scent of oil lamps. Next, you assist in sealing the tomb. Men block the doorway with massive stones hewn from the hillside. Women pour resin into the seams to keep out insects and thieves. You press each seal with a clay stamp bearing the Pharaoh's cartouche to warn any who would disturb the dead. The stone wall rises, leaving only the narrow air shaft through which spells can still be whispered and incense burned. Outside the tomb entrance, you help tie lengths of linen bands printed with protective spells across the sealed doorway. These spells call on Amenta, the western desert, and on the guardians of the horizon to keep evil spirits at bay. You feel the tension in your arms as you pull the linen strips taut and tie them in sturdy knots. You step back and bow to the sealed tomb as though greeting a sleeping king. When night falls, you join the temple priests for a final vigil at the mortuary chapel. Torches line the colonnade and cast dancing shadows on reliefs of Osiris and Isis. The high priest recites a closing hymn to the powers of resurrection. You hold your hands at your sides and close your eyes as the fires crackle and the chant swells. You sense the presence of the departed noble rising between the columns in triumph. Before you leave, you offer a handful of barley grain to the shrine of Anubis. You whisper the name of the noble and promise to maintain the tomb until the return of the flood. You feel the smooth faience against your palm and slip a small Eye of Horus amulet into your own cloak as a token of the day's rites. You depart beneath the starry sky, carrying the memory of linen layers and holy spells beneath your skin. You know that without careful mummification and the power of inscriptions, the noble's soul would wander lost in the darkness. You know that without protective charms and the opening of the mouth, the senses would fail in the afterlife. You carry the weight of both death and hope as you walk home, guided by the flicker of oil lamps and the promise of safe passage beyond the veil of mortal life. You awake before dawn and make your way to the scriptorium beside the temple walls. The air is cool and carries the faint scent of reed smoke. Inside the courtyard, a dozen scribes sit on low benches before long wooden tables covered in damp clay tablets. Their reed styluses lie ready at hand. You join the youngest scribe, a boy named Amenhotep, and help prepare the tablets for the morning's work. First, you smooth the surface of each tablet with a piece of damp cloth. You press your palm in a circle to be sure the clay is even. Then you hand the tablets to Amenhotep, who draws neat horizontal lines across the field where the census will be recorded. Today you will count every household in the villages that lie along this stretch of canal. The data will determine grain rations and forced labor quotas for the coming months. At sunrise, the temple herald calls the count. Families gather at the camp gate and present their household tokens of baked clay stamped with their family number. One by one, they step before the scribe bench. Amenhotep calls out the number and the adult male name. You run your reed stylus down the clay line and mark a small tick beneath the household column. You note the number of children and the number of able-bodied workers. The sick and elderly are counted separately under a column reserved for medical relief. By mid-morning, you have recorded over 200 households. A senior scribe crosses your entries with the temple tally scroll. He nods once and moves on to inspect the next tablet. You feel the weight of every mark you make, because each tally will shape the lives of families across the province. Each tick can mean the difference between a full bowl of porridge and a half ration. Around you, other scribes work on disease reports. They record the number of fever cases, skin rashes, and breathing troubles from the clinic tents. A healer enters with a clay tablet listing new cases. The scribe copies each name and ailment into the ledger. You assist by mixing a wet clay tablet with fine reed grooves to hold the ink. You watch as the scribe dips his stylus into black pigment made from soot and gum. He traces each symbol with a steady hand. At midday, the census pauses for the distribution of grain. Officials arrive carrying baskets of barley and millet from the main granary. They bring jars of tokens stamped with today's allocation and present them to each scribe. You note the jar number beside each household entry. When the work returns to the tablets, you mark the quota column with the amount of grain due. You record both the standard rations and the special relief allotments for the sick and the elderly. After the meal break, you help prepare tablets for invoice notices. These scrolls will travel to work crews along the canal banks. Each crew leader will present his invoice to the clerk in the field and receive further supplies. You draw grid lines to separate the date, the crew number, the supply type, and the amount issued. The senior scribe hands you a token to press into the corner of each tablet. It bears the Pharaoh's seal and guarantees that the record is official. In the afternoon, the scribes shift to the temple court, where complaints against overzealous tax collectors are heard. You and another scribe set up a fresh line of tablets and record each petition. A farmer stands before the magistrate and accuses the collector of taking double the legal share. You note his name, his village number, and the alleged excess amount. The magistrate stamps the petition with his ring and orders an investigation. You record the decision on the clay and date it by the lunar calendar. As daylight fades, you return to the central hall to tabulate grain inventories. You measure the depth of grain in sealed jars by lowering a reed rod marked in finger widths. You mark each measurement on the clay record. You calculate the volume of the jars and the average yield per jar. You tally these figures in columns labeled Storehouse 1, Storehouse 2, and so on, so the temple can plan distributions in the months ahead. Before you leave, you help the senior scribe finish the day's summary tablet. He reviews every column: population, count disease, cases, grain quotas, tax petitions, and inventory measures. He nods at your work and presses his ring into the corner of the tablet as a final stamp of approval. Each summary stands as the record of another day's order imposed upon the land. At sunset, you walk away from the scriptorium with your own token in hand. You pass granaries and temple pylons as the last light fades. You taste ash on your tongue from the incense burned in prayer for the Pharaoh's reign. You wonder how these records will shape the lives of so many, and how the same tablets will punish cheats and reward the faithful. You know that without census and careful record keeping, the kingdom would falter. Without tracking sickness, it could not direct healers or stockpile rare medicines. Without enforcing grain quotas, the stores would empty before the next flood. You know that you would not last a single day as a scribe if you could not draw each symbol in perfect alignment, if you could not calculate grain volumes, and if you could not bear the weight of every family's fate upon your reed stylus. Yet because you do these tasks each day, you hold the threads of order in your hands and keep the realm's heart beating beneath the endless curves of the Nile. You rise before sunrise, to the sound of temple bells calling the faithful to the first festival of the year. The sky is still a band of pale gold as you join the priests at the grand pylons of the great temple. Today marks the New Year festival, when the flood is celebrated as the rebirth of life itself. You carry a tray of loaves shaped like lotus blossoms and cups of foaming beer brewed from sprouted barley. At the temple gate, the priests anoint your forehead with sacred oil, scented with myrrh and frankincense. They chant a hymn to Happy the River Lord, asking that the life-giving waters return. You offer your loaves at the foot of the seated statue of Amun-Ra, and pour beer into a silver bowl as an offering. The liquid spills over the rim and glitters in the torchlight. You feel the thrill of renewal in your chest as the chant swells. From the inner courtyard, a troupe of dancers emerges wearing skirts of fine linen and wreaths of palm leaves. Their bare feet drum the flagstones in rhythm with kettle drums. You join the procession behind them, carrying a jar of oil infused with crushed acacia pods. As the dancers weave through columns, you sprinkle oil onto the temple floor in patterns of spirals and waves. Each drop carries prayers for abundance and health. By mid-morning, the courtyard is filled with worshippers who bear trays of fruit and vegetables. You see tables groaning under baskets of figs, dates, and pomegranates. Scribes stand by clay tablets and record each offering. You step forward with a dish of sweet lupin beans glistening in honey. A priest inscribes your name on a fresh tablet and lifts the dish above his head. Smoke rises from the incense burners and curls among the columns like benediction. At the height of the festival, the high priest mounts a golden bark and floats it through the temple halls. On its prow sits the statue of the god renewed for the season. You and other temple servants gently guide the bark along a carved channel of water. You feel the cool ripple of liquid beneath the stone floor. The flicker of oil lamps casts shifting shadows on the painted walls. In that moment, you sense the god's presence walking beside you. After the bark ceremony, you join the feast that follows in the outer court. Long benches are set beneath canvas awnings. Bowls of barley stew and flat loaves fill each table. You taste the rich broth thickened with garlic, onions, and lentils. Meat from sacrificial cattle flavored with coriander and cumin is passed in generous portions. You share each bite with neighbors whose fields you helped repair during the drought. Laughter rises above the clatter of pottery and the murmur of grateful voices. When the meal ends, the priests lead a purification rite at the sacred lake. You and hundreds of worshippers wade into the cool water up to your waist. A priest sprinkles a mixture of natron and crushed lotus petals across the surface. You dip your hands into the lake and wash your face, then kneel to drink deep. The water tastes of earth and promise. As you emerge, you feel cleansed of the past year's troubles. In the afternoon, the temple musicians perform a concert of lyres, flutes, and tambourines. You sit among stone benches and watch dancers in masks depict the sun's journey across the sky. Each movement honors the cycle of rebirth. You clap along with the rhythm and feel unity with every face around you. The sun slants toward the western horizon, and the music slows to a gentle lullaby. As dusk falls, you carry offerings of fresh bread and flowers to the shrine of the underworld deities. You kneel by the black basalt statue of Osiris and slide a small loaf carved with his name into a hollow at the base. You lay a spray of lotus blossoms at his feet. A priest lights a single oil lamp and places it beside the offering. He chants a hymn of safe passage for souls who have gone before. You close your eyes and imagine the cycle of life and death turning like the wheel of the sun. Finally, beneath a canopy of stars, you join the closing ceremony at the temple gate. Priests sway with sistrums and bells as they recite blessings for peace and plenty. You hold your hands above your head in silent prayer. You taste the cool night air on your lips. You feel the weight of this day's devotion in your bones, and the warmth of divine favor settling over the land like dew. You walk home along lamplit streets, carrying the memory of bread and beer, incense and song. You know that without these festivals, the people's faith would falter and the fields would fail. You know that you would not survive a single season in ancient Egypt if you could not offer your loaves, your prayers, and your labor to the gods who govern the flood, the sun, and the harvest. Yet in every ritual you renew your bond with the divine and ensure that life will return again with each turning of the year. You awaken before dawn at the edge of the pyramid site, where rows of mud brick huts stand ready to shelter today's workforce. The overseer's horn sounds twice through the chill air, signaling the start of public works. You step from your hut and join the long column of villagers who have volunteered or been assigned to labor in place of famine relief. The Pharaohs' decree offers food and shelter in return for building monuments that will stand for eternity and keep the people from starving. First, you pass through the muster tent where scribes check your name against the temple census rolls. Each household received a clay token marking the number of laborers it may send. You hand over your token and receive a ration ticket. In return, a small disc stamped with the Pharaoh's emblem and the date. This ticket guarantees your daily allotment of grain, oil, and beer, as long as you remain on site. Armed guards stand by to ensure no one slips away without permission. Outside, the tent fields of stone blocks rise in neat terraces. Temple builders and pyramid crews work side by side. You step toward the tool shed where leather water skins hang and rows of pick and chisel lie on wooden racks. An apprentice hands you a sturdy wooden shovel and a new leather apron. You strap it on and follow the path carved through the scaffolding to the workface. Here, a team smooths limestone slabs to form part of the temple's outer wall. You join them hauling baskets of wet mortar stirred from river sand and lime. The master mason guides each basket into your hands, and you press the mortar between blocks until the seams disappear. A scribe stands nearby, tallying each basketful. For every 10 baskets you haul, you earn an extra handful of grain beyond the standard ration. This incentive encourages strong effort and helps relieve the worst hunger when supplies are tight. By mid-morning, you break for the first distribution of rations. Under a reed canopy, you see long tables piled with loaves of flat bread and bowls of thin porridge made from barley and lentils. You present your ticket and receive 1 loaf and 2 measures of porridge. A cook ladles warm oil into your bowl to add flavor and calories. You swallow quickly, then pass down the line to fill your water skin at the canvas-covered trough. The water tastes of clay and moss, but it brings a welcome relief to parched throats. After the meal, you return to work on a new section of the temple's sanctum. You heave baskets of carved stone onto wooden sledges and guide them into place along timber rails. Each block must fit the master's layout exactly. When you misalign a stone, you hear the masons bark, and you have to pull it free and start again. Though the labor is punishing, your hunger is at bay, and your family back home will eat tonight because of your work. At midday, the overseer rings the bell again, and a second ration is passed out. Today it is boiled barley thickened with garlic and salt. You dip your bread into the stew and let every crumb linger on your tongue. You rise to stretch aching legs and join a group in carrying fresh palm leaf mats to the healing tent. Here injured workers rest on straw pallets and receive bandages of honey and natron. You place the mats beneath a man whose foot was crushed by a rolling sledge. He closes his eyes and whispers thanks as you slip the mat under his leg. In the afternoon, you attend a brief assembly at the temple pylon. A priest addresses the laborers, reminding them that by building this sanctuary, they are caring for the gods, who in turn will care for the land. He sprinkles barley grain at the feet of the statue of Renenutet, goddess of harvests, and prays that each hand that toils today will reap plenty when the flood returns. You lift your face to catch the grains and feel the sacred promise settle into your heart. Then you return to the supply tent, where scribes record the day's output and prepare tomorrow's rations. You see tablets listing each laborer and the baskets of stone or mortar he provided. The scribes write in neat symbols that will guide the overseers when rationing grain is most difficult. You quietly admire the precision of their work and wonder how they can transform numbers into justice and survival. As sunset approaches, the day's work ends. You set down your shovel and join the line for the final ration of the day. Today it is a small jar of salted fish and 2 cups of beer. The fish is oily and briny, but nourishing. You raise the beer to your lips and let the foam tickle your nose. You laugh with your comrades as relief settles in your belly and strength returns to aching muscles. Before you leave, the high priest moves among the huts with a tray of small amulets carved from green feldspar. He offers each laborer a tiny eye of Horus, tied with red linen thread. He whispers a protective spell into your ear and ties the thread around your wrist. The amulet is meant to guard against accidents and disease for the remainder of your service. You feel the weight of the stone and know it carries both magic and duty. Under a canopy of stars, you trudge back to your hut. You taste fish and beer on your tongue and feel straw beneath your legs as you lie down. The sound of distant chanting drifts through the night air. You close your eyes to the whisper of wind through palm leaves and to the promise that by building monuments, you are building a shield against hunger and hardship. You know that without these public works schemes, the drought would starve the poor and leave no work for the idle. You know that you would not survive a single season if you could not haul stone on the Pharaohs' temple walls in exchange for grain and shelter. Yet because you and your neighbors build these monuments, you keep families fed and temples rising. You drift into sleep with the scarred image of sun-bleached stone and the assurance that each block you set is both your labor and your lifeline. You have seen the Nile's waters foul with plague, and you have knelt to dig new wells. You have watched whole villages retreat into tents of reed mats and clay bowls of soup, isolating the sick to keep death from devouring every life. You have borne witness to the mercy of temple healers, as they anointed foreheads with scented oil, wrapped bandages of linen inscribed with sacred spells, and set scarab amulets against the dark forces that fever and despair can summon. You have felt the sting of willow bark paste, and tasted the bitter brew that soothed trembling limbs. You have labored in drought and famine, pressing clay and straw into canal walls until the trickle of water returned. You have stood under the sun's full fury, carrying baskets of earth, brick and stone, so that fields might drink again. You have marched to granaries to claim your household's ration, knowing that without each measure of barley and millet, your children would know only hunger. You have seen tithes claimed by the Pharaoh's tax collectors and felt the weight of forced labor tokens pressed into your palm. You have carried heavy loads of mortar and stone for temple and pyramid, exchanging sweat and muscle for a single bowl of porridge, a loaf of bread, and a promise of safety until dawn. You have known the terror of locust clouds blotting out the sky, and you have risen before dawn to build smoke barriers, ring metal bowls and dig traps so that the swarm would turn away and spare even a single stalk of young grain. You have held fast to the faith that prayers to Nepri, the grain god, and spells scratched onto clay tokens might hold back the plague of insects and keep the seed of life in the soil. You have wept for fallen fields, and then tasted hope in the charred remains that could nourish the earth once more. You have marched beneath banners of new or fallen pharaohs, and felt the tremor in your gut as you stood before bronze-clad guards. You have delivered petitions for fair grain shares, and known the crack of the overseer's lash when demand offended absolute rule. You have sworn fealty at the barracks gate and carried spear, shield, and clay ration ticket on marches into foreign deserts. You have seen your village robbed of its able-bodied sons, leaving wives and children to tend both fields and grief. You have marveled at the stone face of the Pharaoh's cartouche carved into temple walls, even as you wondered if your own name would echo through time. You have built mighty granaries of sun-baked brick, with vaulted roofs that guard the yield of years. You have hauled clay jars in and out, lining each chamber with measured precision. You have recorded each jar's volume on tablets of wet clay, inscribing the tally that will govern rations and relief in lean times. You have tasted the sweet sting of salted fish and thick beer as daily payment for mortar and picks. You have knelt beneath temple priests who counted each grain of fortune with reed stylus until the evening stars shone. You have lain on cold stone slabs while priests carved out intestines and packed them in canopic jars. You have watched the body wrapped in bandages inscribed with hymns and protection spells. You have borne witness to the lifting of the mouth ceremony so that the noble senses would awaken in the underworld. You have lowered the coffin into rock-cut tombs and sealed the entrance with clay seals bearing sacred cartouches. You have left jars of bread, oil, and fruit beside the still body and heard the mourners lament at the loss of flesh and life. You have copied symbols and sums on clay tablets beneath the temple eaves. You have recorded outbreaks of fever and pox so that healing teams might be dispatched. You have tracked grain quotas, tax petitions, and work assignments in neat columns of cuneiform-like glyphs. You have enforced the law of numbers and known the power that a single stroke of the reed stylus can wield over the fate of a neighbor or a distant town. You have counted the living and chronicled the dead so that order might prevail even when chaos threatened. You have followed the seasonal cycle of festivals that renew the bond between earth and sky. You have woven wreaths of lotus and palm, offered loaves shaped like flowers, poured beer as libations, and joined the dancers who pounded drums in praise of Happy, the flood god. You have felt the sacred bark float on water channels through temple halls, carrying the god incarnate among the faithful. You have drunk from the purified lake, sprinkled barley grain on temple floors, and danced beneath the stars as priests beat tambourines in a hymn of rebirth. You have marched from famine camps to canal towns where tents cling together like flotsam on a swollen river. You have queued for water drawn from temporary wells, broken into brick warehouses of meager grain, and crowded into sleeping huts that rattled in the night wind. You have shared beds with strangers, meals with refugees, and feigned laughter to mask despair. You have refused to let hopelessness unhinge your spirit, even when the Nile ran dry for seasons. You have accepted the Pharaohs' decrees, building public works as social relief when fields failed and granaries emptied. You have hauled stone for temples and pyramids in exchange for grain and beer. You have pressed each slab into place so that monuments would stand as bulwarks against hunger. You have earned every morsel of food with the grinding weight of your labor. You have felt the sting of the overseer's lash when quotas were not met, yet you have known that turning to stone was a price both sacred and cruel. Now you stand at the edge of memory, sweat still clinging to faded linen, dust clinging to every hair. You taste ash, clay, and barley on your tongue. You feel bones thickened by ceaseless toil, and hands torn by rope and chisel. You carry amulets of faience and gold that promise protection in life and in death. You hear the chant of priests echoing through stone corridors and the drumbeat of temple ceremonies. You have lived 1,000 lifetimes in a single dawn, from the pit of plague to the cradle of mummification, from the channels of famine to the halls of record-keeping. You have built the walls that upheld kingdoms and the shrines that beckoned gods. You have sown the seed of life in broken soil and watched it spring anew against all odds. You have mourned the fallen in mass graves and celebrated the living in jubilant festivals. You have counted every soul, weighed every heart, measured every grain, and logged every trial. And yet you know this: you would not last a single day as an ancient Egyptian if you could not rise before first light in panic or prayer, if you could not endure hunger in the fields, if you could not haul stone under a burning sky, if you could not stand before the Pharaoh's guards with defiance, if you could not measure grain with perfect care, if you could not mix medicine and magic for fevered bodies, if you could not weave reed shelters in crowded camps, if you could not guide coffins into tombs with reverence, if you could not record life and death on clay tablets with unwavering hand, if you could not join a chorus in temple courtyards under moonlight, if you could not turn your labor into meals for your family, and if you could not hold fast to fragile hope in the presence of disaster, this civilization's heart beat only because of sweat, salve ink, and grain. It moved onward by the strength of blistered hands and the promise of dawn. It stood tall through stone and song because each man, woman, and child endured the weight of daily suffering to carry the Nile's promise forward. You would not outlast a single sunrise in their world unless you bore every hardship with the fierce determination that held a people and a kingdom together along the river of life.